Would you believe that a handful of broken wood and rusted metal could bring music back to a forgotten world? In the frozen grey dawn, with breath fogging the air, Gregor Weiss scoured the camp's garbage heap, fingers raw and aching, searching for hope among the ruins. The refugee camp, sprawled across the outskirts of Lausanne, Switzerland, was a patchwork of battered barracks, Red Cross tents flapping in the wind, and muddy footpaths carved by hundreds of desperate souls. Gregor's boots crunched over frostbitten grass as he bent to examine a length of splintered chair leg, his mind racing through measurements and possibilities. He could feel the eyes of the other refugees on him, some curious, some wary, all weighed down by exhaustion, but he hardly noticed. Beneath his breath he whispered a single name: Elena. Gregor's world had once been a city gilded with music and possibility. Vienna, before the darkness fell, had been a place of laughter, of string quartets drifting through open windows, of his mother's gentle hands guiding his own across piano keys. But the city had changed overnight. Doors slammed shut, friends vanished, and the only music left was the thud of boots on cobblestones. Gregor, a mechanical engineer by training and the quiet pillar of his family, watched as the world shrank to a single imperative: survival. He fled in the dead of night, leaving behind a city that no longer wanted him, clutching only a small satchel of tools and the memory of his mother's favorite Chopin nocturne. Now, in this camp ringed by icy mountains, Gregor was just another displaced soul, one of hundreds who drifted through days defined by rations of black bread, the distant wail of sirens, and the ever-present ache of loss. He moved like a shadow, slipping between the barracks, scavenging for discarded nails and bent hinges, anything that might serve a purpose. To the others, he was the man who stared too long at broken things, as if he could will them back to life. But Gregor had a secret. He watched Elena Rossi, the music teacher from Milan, as she crossed the muddy yard each morning, her scarf pulled tight against the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He saw the way she lingered by the shattered community hall, fingertips brushing the peeling paint where a piano had once stood. He noticed how she folded a battered score into her coat pocket, as if the music inside it could keep her heart beating. Elena's arrival had stirred the camp in a way that few new faces could. She was a study in contrasts. Her voice could command a room of unruly children. Yet she moved through the camp with the ghostly stillness of someone who had lost too much. Word spread quickly. Her family home in Milan had been leveled by Allied bombs. Her parents and younger brother scattered into the unknown. She carried herself with a resilience that bordered on defiance, but there was a brittleness in her smile, a note of sorrow that never quite faded. Each morning, Elena gathered the camp's children in an empty barrack, warmed only by their breath and the stove's feeble glow. She drew piano keys on scraps of paper and taught the children to play symphonies on silent tables, their fingers dancing over imaginary ivories. Her voice, soft and melodic, conjured memories of grandeur none of them had ever known. Yet, as the lesson ended and the children scattered back to their chores, Gregor saw the way Elena's shoulders slumped, her hands trembling as she gathered the paper keys. She hadn't touched a real piano since Milan. The camp's only instrument, a battered upright, had been smashed during a wave of desperate arrivals, its remains now scattered among the refuse piles Gregor haunted. On this bitter morning, as Gregor knelt beside the remains of a broken bed frame, he caught sight of Elena through the haze of his breath. She was kneeling in the frost, helping a small boy tie a ragged shoelace, her laughter a brief melody in the cold. Something in that sound, fragile, almost defiant, lodged in Gregor's chest. He remembered his mother's words. Music can survive anything, Gregor, even silence. He closed his fist around a handful of nails, the sting of cold biting deep, and made a silent promise. If music could survive, so could she. Elena, for her part, noticed the strange man with the kind eyes and the engineer's hands. She had seen him in the evenings, sitting alone by the barrack window, sketching diagrams on the backs of Red Cross forms, his pencil moving with quiet determination. She wondered about his story, about the family he never spoke of, about the country he had left behind. She recognized the look in his eyes, a hunger for something more than survival, a longing for beauty amid the ruins. The camp itself was a world of small mercies and daily indignities. Meals arrived in dented metal carts, watery soup, a crust of bread, a sliver of cheese for the lucky. The Swiss guards patrolled the perimeter, with the bored vigilance of men who had seen too much suffering to care. Children darted between the barracks, their laughter tinged with desperation, inventing games out of rags and stones. At night, the mountain winds howled through the cracks in the walls, and the refugees huddled together for warmth, trading stories in a dozen languages. Gregor's days became a routine of scavenging and silent observation. He mapped the camp in his mind, where the Red Cross kept their supply crates, which barracks had loose floorboards, where the maintenance shed's door stuck just enough to slip a hand inside. He hid his growing collection of scraps beneath his cot, careful not to draw the notice of the camp authorities, especially Herr Baumann, the humorless Swiss supervisor, with a suspicious eye for any deviation from routine. But it was the evenings that weighed heaviest. After the children's lessons, the community hall would fill with a restless hush. Elena would sit on the splintered steps, her hands folded around the tattered score, head bowed in silent prayer. Some nights she would hum a lullaby, her voice barely audible above the wind. It was on those nights that Gregor resolved to do something impossible. He began to plan in secret. Each nail, each screw, each warped plank became part of a vision, an instrument cobbled together from the ruins, a gift for a woman he barely knew but felt drawn to all the same. The rational part of his mind rebelled at the absurdity. How could he build a piano out of scraps? Where would he find the felt for the hammers, the wire for the strings? But the memory of Elena's smile, fleeting and rare, spurred him on. If music could survive, perhaps hope could too. The days blurred together in a rhythm of scarcity and longing. Gregor scavenged by dawn, worked by candlelight, and dreamed by moonlight. He fashioned keys from chair legs, hammered metal into crude brackets, scavenged wire from abandoned radios. Each piece carried a history, a child's broken toy, a mother's lost bed frame, the detritus of lives uprooted by war. Yet, in Gregor's hands, these broken things began to take shape, to find new purpose. He watched Elena from afar, noting the way she coaxed music from silence, the way she comforted the children with songs of home. He saw the loneliness in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the haunted set of her jaw. He wondered if she would ever forgive the world for what it had taken, if she would ever believe in beauty again. One afternoon, as the snow began to fall in heavy, muffling flakes, Gregor passed by the window of Elena's makeshift classroom. He paused, watching as she led the children in a silent symphony, their fingers dancing over paper keys, their faces alight with concentration. For a brief moment, the war seemed to recede, replaced by the magic of music and the promise of something more. Gregor pressed his palm to the cold glass, whispering a silent vow. Inside, Elena sensed his presence. She glanced up, meeting his gaze through the frosted pane. There was a question in her eyes, one he could not yet answer. He offered a hesitant smile and she returned it, brittle but genuine. In that exchange something shifted, a fragile thread of connection, spun from shared sorrow and the faintest glimmer of hope. As darkness fell and the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Gregor returned to his cot, pulling the blanket tight against the cold. He unwrapped his cache of salvaged parts, laying them out in careful rows. Each piece was a memory, a fragment of a life lost or left behind. He began to sketch again, the lines growing bolder, the vision taking shape. The first note would be for Elena, a single perfect sound to remind her that music and joy could still exist, even here. The camp was silent, save for the distant howl of the wind. Gregor closed his eyes, listening for the music beneath the silence, the song that had carried him from Vienna to this place, the song he longed to give back to her. In the darkness, he whispered her name once more, Elena, a prayer, a promise. And so beneath the indifferent gaze of the mountains amid the ruins of war, a single man set out to build a piano from scraps, not only to bring music back to the camp, but to see her smile again. Nights in the camp fell early and hard, as if darkness itself were rationed, doled out by the hour, enveloping the huddled refugees before supper was barely over. Gregor Weiss had come to know these nights intimately. the slow hush as children were corralled into barracks, the brittle crackle of frost on window panes, and the restless shifting of grown men who by day wore the posture of patience, but by night confessed their uncertainties to the ceiling. It was in these hours when the camp's idle murmurs faded that Gregor worked. He waited for the last patrol of Herr Baumann, the camp's supervisor, to pass. The man's measured footsteps, always precise, always suspicious, would echo along the corridor, his flashlight slicing through shadows as if searching for secrets. Only when those steps retreated did Gregor slip out, metal tin in hand, scavenging for the hoarded treasures of the day. A bent piano wire, a plank from a broken cot, a handful of screws filched from a splintered crate. The bitter Swiss wind gnawed at his cheeks, but he moved quietly, always with Elena's name in his heart. Gregor's workshop was nothing but a crawl space behind the battered community hall, where the walls still bore the scars of 100 hopeful hands. There, by the light of a single stuttering candle, he sketched blueprints in the dirt, his hands trembling with both cold and anticipation. The plan was simple only in theory. No grand piano, not even an upright, but a box with keys and hammers, something that could sing, however faintly, beneath Elena's touch. But the camp was not forgiving. Materials were scarce. Every nail, every board, every sliver of felt was spoken for. Once Gregor had tried to barter for a length of copper wire with a Polish shoemaker, only to be met with a sad shake of the head. "If I had more," the man said, "do you think my children would still wear shoes with holes?" Sometimes children followed Gregor, giggling at his hunched silhouette and the odd bits of junk he carried. "Are you building a rocket to escape, Herr Weiss?" they teased, their voices both mocking and, beneath it all, hungry for distraction. In the daylight, Gregor was careful to avoid attention, but his endeavors did not go unnoticed. Herr Baumann had a nose for trouble, an instinct honed by years of watching people do desperate things. One frosty morning, as Gregor stowed a battered hinge in his coat, Baumann appeared, his breath a plume of authority in the cold air. "What are you doing, Herr Weiss?" The supervisor's voice was clipped, his German as precise as his boots. Gregor straightened, heart pounding. "Just fixing something, sir." Baumann's eyes narrowed. "There are rules here. No hoarding, no contraband, no private projects." He stepped closer, inspecting the hinge as though it might conceal a secret. "If I find you stealing from the camp's supplies, there will be consequences." "I understand," Gregor replied, forcing calm into his voice. Baumann hesitated, then brushed past, muttering about idle hands. Gregor watched him go, a cold sweat prickling his skin. He knew that one wrong step, one misplaced screw, one complaint from a neighbor, could see his project destroyed before it even began. Yet it was not Baumann's threats that gnawed most deeply at Gregor's resolve, but the weight of futility. Each night, as he wrestled with warped wood and stubborn keys, he wondered if all this effort would matter. Would Elena even want a makeshift piano? Could it offer her the solace she had lost? Or would it simply remind her of everything that was gone? Elena herself was a mystery wrapped in music and sorrow. She moved through the camp with a quiet dignity, her hair always pulled back in a neat chignon, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Each morning she gathered the orphans in the community hall, arranging them in careful rows before tables covered with paper keyboards she had drawn by hand. Her voice was gentle, coaxing, patient, but Gregor saw the way her fingers hovered over the paper, longing for something real. Outwardly, Elena was composed, but at night the mask slipped. She sat by her cot, staring at a tattered envelope, her lips moving in silent prayer. Gregor learned through whispers and fragments of overheard conversation that Elena had lost her parents to the bombings in Milan. Her younger brother Marco was last seen boarding a train for Florence weeks before the city fell. No word had come, no certainty, only the ache of not knowing. When Elena received a letter, delivered late, its edges yellowed with travel, she opened it with trembling hands. Gregor saw her retreat behind the kitchen tent, and though he did not mean to intrude, her muffled sobs reached him all the same. The letter told her nothing, only that Marco's fate was uncertain. It was not the worst news, but not the best. In the absence of hope, Elena seemed to shrink, her lessons growing quieter and shorter as the days grew colder. The children noticed too. Their makeshift choir faltered, The clapping games lost their rhythm. Once a boy named Emil asked if they would ever have a real piano again. Elena smiled, but the light in her eyes did not reach her voice. "Perhaps one day," she said, gazing out the frosted window as if searching for a miracle. Gregor heard that exchange and felt his own doubts swell. His project progressed slowly, agonizingly so. The keys, carved from scavenged wood, stuck in the cold. The hammers jammed, lacking proper felt. Sometimes, in frustration, Gregor would sit back, staring at his rough creation, and wonder if he was only building disappointment. As the days wore on, Gregor's movements drew more attention. The children, emboldened by boredom, began to gather near his workshop, peeking through cracks in the wood. At first their questions were curious. "What are you making? Can we help?" But when they realized the jumble of parts offered no quick delight, their tone shifted. "It looks like a chicken coop," one girl snickered. Another boy, older and sharper, jeered. "Even the rats wouldn't play music on that." Gregor tried to ignore them, but their laughter stung. Only once did he snap, telling them to find some other mischief, and immediately felt guilty, knowing they too craved something beautiful, anything to break the monotony of hunger and loss. Inside the community hall, Elena continued her lessons, but her heart was elsewhere. She moved through Chopin's nocturnes and Schumann's lullabies with a mechanical precision, her eyes drifting to the empty corner where the camp's piano had once stood, now just a memory, splintered and silent. One evening, as snow began to fall, thick, silent flakes settling on the barracks and muting the world, Gregor lingered outside the hall, listening. The children had gone, their laughter replaced by the hush of winter. He saw Elena alone, carefully folding her paper keyboards, her hands shaking. He hesitated, then rapped softly on the doorframe. Elena looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Forgive me," Gregor began. "I didn't mean to intrude." She managed a tired smile. "You're not intruding. The children have gone home, if you can call these walls a home." Gregor stepped inside, the cold following him like a shadow. He glanced at the paper keyboards, then at Elena. "You play beautifully, even without an instrument." She laughed, the sound brittle. "Beautifully, I'm not sure. It feels like pretending. Sometimes I think music is a luxury for another world, a world that no longer exists." He wanted to protest, to tell her that music was the only thing that made this world bearable, but he saw the grief etched in her face. "My brother used to say that music could save us," Elena continued, her gaze distant. "He played the violin. Even during air raids he would play. I thought as long as I heard him we would be safe." She pressed her hands together, her knuckles white. "Now I do not know if he is alive. The letter, it told me nothing. How can I teach hope, Gregor, when I have none left?" Gregor swallowed, his own memories rising. His father's gentle voice, his mother's lullabies, the echo of laughter in rooms now lost to darkness. He moved to stand beside her, uncertainty making him awkward. "I'm not a musician, not truly, but I remember Vienna before the war. I remember watching my mother play on winter evenings, her hands dancing across the keys. I thought I could build anything, fix anything. But not this." He gestured at the empty space where the piano had stood. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind howled outside, rattling the thin walls. Then Elena looked at him, her eyes searching. "What are you building, Gregor? I see you every night, gathering scraps. The children say you are making a machine." Gregor hesitated. He wanted to surprise her, to see her smile without knowing the reason. But in that moment, secrecy felt like another kind of burden. "I am trying," he said finally, "to build a piano. Or at least something that might sound a little like one. For you, for the children, for all of us, perhaps." Elena drew in a sharp breath, her hands flying to her lips. "But why?" He shrugged, a shy smile tugging at his mouth. "Because I see how much you miss it. Because you give the children hope, even when you have none. Because sometimes building something is the only way I know how to fight despair." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she did not look away. "You are a foolish man, Gregor Weiss," she whispered, "but perhaps we need a little foolishness." They stood together in the lamplight, both fragile and fierce, bound by the memory of music and the ache of what had been lost. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the camp in silence, but inside, something had shifted, a fragile thread of hope woven through the darkness. Gregor left the hall that night with renewed determination. The ridicule of the children, the suspicion of Herr Baumann, the scarcity of supplies, all of it seemed bearable now. He knew the risks, he knew that failure was likely. But he also knew that, for Elena, for the children, for the memory of all they had loved and lost, he had to try. So, under the watchful gaze of the mountains, Gregor worked on, his hands raw, his heart full, and his hope stubborn as ever. And just as Gregor found the courage to keep building, maybe you can help us build something too. If you're moved by stories of hope, resilience, and the power of love, even in the darkest times, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share these voices from history, and together we can keep their music alive. Snow fell in slow, silent spirals that morning, transforming the refugee camp into a landscape of uneasy purity. The world seemed softer beneath its hush, a deception Gregor knew, for the cold bit deeper, and the camp's bitterness grew as supplies dwindled. In the narrow barrack where he'd secreted his half-built dream, Gregor's breath hung in the air, white as chalk dust as he hunched over the remnants of the piano. His hands, calloused and raw, worked clumsily in the numbing chill, guiding a battered file across the edge of a scavenged key. Outside, the camp's bell clanged, summoning the refugees for morning roll call. Gregor ignored it, fighting the urge to weep as his file slipped, gouging a deep scar into the soft pine. He pressed his brow to the unfinished key, inhaling the scent of old wood and desperation. The piano's skeleton stood before him, a lopsided frame of mismatched planks, its backboard patched with tin cans hammered flat, the keys uneven as a child's teeth. It was ugly. It was fragile. Yet to him, it was hope made tangible. A sudden knock jolted him upright. His heart thudded, panic blooming in his chest. He knew the rhythm before the door even opened, sharp, insistent, authoritative. Herr Baumann stepped into the barrack, his uniform immaculate despite the mud, eyes glinting beneath the brim of his cap. 2 Red Cross volunteers hovered behind him, uncertain and apologetic. Gregor straightened, trying to shield the instrument with his body. "Herr Baumann," he said, voice brittle. Baumann's gaze swept the room, settling on the makeshift piano. He exhaled sharply, as if the sight offended him. "Herr Weiss, what is this?" His German was crisp, clipped. The other men shifted uneasily. Gregor's mouth worked, but his defenses were thin. Exhaustion had peeled his composure raw. "It's for the children, for the music lessons," he managed, aware of the futility even as he spoke. Baumann stalked forward, running a gloved hand across the crooked keys. "Contraband, unauthorized use of camp resources. You were warned about this project, were you not?" He turned to the volunteers, voice rising. "Destroy it, immediately." The words hung in the air, heavier than the snow outside. Gregor surged forward, hands outstretched. "Please, let me finish it. It's nothing dangerous, only for music, for the children." Baumann's expression hardened. "This is not a place for luxuries, Herr Weiss. We have rules for a reason. You will dismantle it yourself. Today." The volunteers hesitated, eyes pleading with Gregor for understanding, but he could not move. He felt his spirit fracture in that instant. The months of stolen hours, the sleepless nights, all reduced to a pile of worthless scraps. He opened his mouth to argue, but Baumann was already striding out, boots echoing against the wooden floor. The door slammed. Gregor stood alone, the unfinished piano between himself and the world. He staggered to the cot and sat heavily, staring at the instrument. His hands trembled, and for the first time since Vienna, tears spilled down his cheeks. He remembered his father's hands guiding his own over a keyboard, the warmth of home, the laughter that had once filled their sunlit apartment. All of it, gone, smothered by war, by distance, by the cold that seeped into everything. He thought of Elena, her slender fingers tracing melodies on imaginary keys, the way she smiled for the children but never for herself. He had built this for her, for a chance at beauty amidst the ashes, but now even that was denied. He pressed his palms to his eyes, willing himself not to break. Elena found him hours later, The barrack was darker now, lit only by a wedge of afternoon light. She entered quietly, her wool coat dusted with snow, her brown hair pulled back in a loose knot. "Gregor?" Her voice was gentle, tentative. He did not answer at first. She stepped closer, her eyes falling on the battered piano. She saw the damage in Gregor's face before she saw it in the room. "I heard what happened," she said, sitting beside him on the thin cot. She placed a gloved hand on his forearm, grounding him. He shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "It's over. Bauman said I have to destroy it. All this—" He gestured helplessly at the half-formed instrument. "It was stupid. I thought I could give you something good, that I could fix something." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. "You were trying to bring music back," she said finally. "That is never stupid." He let out a harsh breath, half a laugh, half a sob. "How can I bring back anything, Elena? I can't even keep a promise. I can't build a piano from nothing." She squeezed his arm, her voice trembling. "You gave me hope, Gregor. That's more than anyone has given me since Milan, since I lost everything." He looked at her then, really looked, into her eyes, dark and bright, fierce with pain and longing. "I wanted you to smile again," he whispered. She smiled, a small broken thing. "You did. For a moment you did." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they sat in the gathering dusk, two exiles mourning a dream deferred. Word of Bauman's order spread quickly through the camp. The children, who had once mocked Gregor's efforts, now watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. Some of them, braver than others, crept to the barrack's door and peered inside, as Gregor gathered his tools and braced himself to take the piano apart. He could not do it. Not yet. Instead, he drifted through the camp like a ghost, haunted by the fragments of melodies that had filled his mind for months. At the meal queue, he barely tasted the watery soup. In the chilly washroom, he stared at his reflection, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a man emptied of purpose. That night, as the wind howled and the barracks shuddered, he dreamed of Vienna, of sunlight streaming through lace curtains, of his mother's laughter, of music filling every corner of their home. He awoke with a start, the ache of longing sharper than ever. He dressed quietly and slipped outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed and silent. The moon cast blue shadows across the camp, glinting off the tin roofs. He found himself drawn to the children's barrack, where Elena taught her lessons. Through the frost-bitten window, he saw her sitting at a table, a group of children clustered around her. She was showing them how to mimic a scale on their paper keyboards, her voice barely audible through the glass. He watched as she closed her eyes, her hands hovering above the paper, playing music only she could hear. The children followed, their faces intent, silent, hopeful. He pressed his forehead to the cold pane, a wave of guilt and tenderness crashing over him. He had failed her, failed them. The next morning, Gregor returned to the barrack to find the piano untouched. The room was cold, the air heavy with anticipation. He set his jaw, determined to salvage what he could, not for himself, but for Elena, and for the children. He began to dismantle the instrument, unscrewing the tin panels, prying loose the makeshift keys. Each piece he removed felt like tearing out a part of himself. He worked in silence, his breath fogging the air, until a voice startled him. "Gregor." He spun around. Herr Baumann stood in the doorway, arms folded. Gregor braced for another rebuke, but Baumann's expression was unreadable. "I said you must destroy it," Baumann said quietly. "I did not say you had to do it alone." Gregor stared at him, confused. Baumann stepped forward, removing his gloves. He surveyed the piano, then looked Gregor in the eye. "In Vienna, before the war, my wife played the violin, my daughter, the cello. We had a quartet every Sunday. Now, I have not heard music in years." His voice was rough, almost tender. Gregor's mouth fell open. He had never imagined Baumann as anything but an adversary. Baumann met his gaze. "Finish it," he said, "but keep it hidden. For the children, for her." He nodded toward the window, where Elena and the children played in the snow. Gregor's breath caught. He searched Baumann's face for mockery, for a trap, but found only exhaustion and a flicker of something softer. Baumann turned on his heel and left, the door closing quietly behind him. Gregor staggered back, dizzy with relief and disbelief. His hands shook as he replaced the panels, reassembled the frame, straightened the crooked keys. The work went faster now, fueled by a new, desperate energy. He worked through the night, his muscles screaming, his heart pounding. He scavenged wire from broken cots, using his engineer's skill to twist and stretch them into rough strings. He tuned each note by ear, improvising hammers from cork and leather. He sanded the keys, coaxing them into alignment, his fingers bleeding onto the white wood. As the sun rose, pale and uncertain, Gregor stepped back and surveyed his creation. It was not beautiful. The frame was patched and uneven, the keys mismatched, the soundboard a patchwork of tin and wood. But it was a piano. It would play. He ran his hands across the keys. They responded, clumsy but true, each note a small miracle. He laughed, hoarse and wild, tears streaking his cheeks. He found Elena by the kitchens, helping to portion out the morning's bread. She looked up as he approached, eyes wary. "Come with me," he said, breathless. She hesitated, but something in his face compelled her. Together they walked through the slush to the barrack. Gregor held the door for her, heart hammering. She stopped short at the sight of the piano. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh, Gregor!" He gestured, unable to speak. She crossed the room, running her fingers over the battered wood, the patched tin, the rough keys. She pressed one, and the note rang out, tentative, shaky, but unmistakably music. She pressed another, and another. A melody began to form, halting but real. The children, drawn by the sound, crowded at the door, faces alight with wonder. Elena looked at Gregor then, her eyes shining. She sat on the rickety stool he had fashioned and placed her hands on the keys. She began to play. The music was broken, uneven, the piano's voice raw and unrefined. But it was music, and it filled the room, weaving through the cracks in the walls, curling around the hearts of everyone who heard it. The children pressed closer, their faces rapt. Gregor stood beside Elena, his hands trembling. She played a lullaby, one her mother had sung to her in Milan. The notes faltered, then grew stronger, flowing from her hands into the battered piano and out into the world. The children began to hum along, their voices rising in tentative harmony. Gregor felt something shift inside him, a breaking open, a letting go. The sorrow that had gripped him for so long eased just a little. When the song ended, there was silence, the kind that follows a miracle. Elena turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and smiled, not the small, broken smile of before, but a radiant, unguarded joy. "You brought music back," she whispered. Gregor shook his head, overwhelmed. "You did." The children burst into applause, laughter spilling into the cold morning. Baumann stood in the doorway, watching, his expression inscrutable. He did not stop them. In that moment, the camp was transformed. The snow outside seemed less cold, the barracks less bleak. For a little while, hope flickered in every heart. Gregor reached for Elena's hand. She took it, her fingers warm in his, and together they faced the battered piano, their creation, their defiance, their gift to a world starved for beauty. And for the first time since the war had stolen everything, Elena smiled. Gregor sat alone on the splintered bench of the community hall, the taste of ash in his mouth. The shell of the piano, his labor of months, his secret hope, lay in jagged pieces behind the kitchen, scattered by Herr Baumann's order. Even now, the Swiss supervisor's clipped German echoed in Gregor's mind. "We have rules, no contraptions, no trouble." The world spun on, indifferent to his heartbreak. He had failed. He had wanted to bring music back to Elena, to the children, to himself. But now even the scraps had been taken away, as if the camp itself was conspiring to choke every spark of beauty. Gregor's hands trembled on his knees. He could still feel the phantom weight of his father's tools, the gentle pressure of keys beneath his fingers. He had poured every memory, every ache, every unspoken word into the skeleton of that piano. For Elena, for the chance to see her smile again. But now, there was nothing. Outside, the air was brittle with cold. He heard children's laughter, thin but stubborn, floating through the frosted window. A memory surfaced. Elena, sitting cross-legged with a little girl, showing her how to press invisible keys drawn on paper. her voice soft but steady, guiding tiny fingers through the opening bars of a Schubert waltz. The music lived in Elena. It pulsed in the children, despite everything. Gregor stood, stretching the ache from his back, and made his way toward the kitchen. The smell of boiled cabbage wafted through the corridor. A group of boys lingered at the doorway, whispering, their eyes darting to him. He had become something of a legend, Gregor the madman, the tinkerer, the one who tried to build a piano from garbage. He offered them a faint, rueful smile and kept walking. By the stove, Elena stood, her dark hair pulled back, hands red from washing. She looked up as he approached, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but still, somehow, warm. "I heard," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Gregor." He shook his head, unable to find words. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all that had been lost. Then Elena did something unexpected. She reached out, squeezing his arm. "You tried," she whispered. "You made me believe even for a little while." She hesitated, searching his face. "That matters." He felt something inside him loosen. A knot, wound tight for too long. "It isn't enough," he said hoarsely. I wanted to give you music again." Elena smiled, a fragile curve of her lips. "There is music here. You reminded me." That night, as the wind rattled the tin roofs and the children huddled by the stoves for warmth, Gregor could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster, thinking of all the things he could not fix, the war, the hunger, the ache in Elena's eyes. But as the hours crept past, a different thought began to take shape, not of what he had lost, but of what he still had. The children's laughter, the way Elena's voice filled a room, even without a piano, the scraps of wood still lying in the snow, not yet carted away. Gregor rose before dawn, pulling on his coat. He slipped outside, his breath sharp in the pre-dawn chill. The ruined pieces of the piano were dusted with frost. He knelt, gathering them gently in his arms. They were broken but not gone. He was not alone. One by one, the children emerged from their beds, drawn by curiosity or perhaps hope. They watched as Gregor carried the wood to the community hall, laying it out on the floor. Elena appeared silent, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice trembling. Gregor looked up at her, something fierce and determined in his gaze. "If we can't have a piano, then let's have something. Anything. Music doesn't need perfection. It needs hearts." He began to arrange the pieces, some as makeshift drums, others as xylophone bars, using metal spoons for mallets. He found empty tin cans, glass bottles saved for rationed milk, and lined them up in a row, tuning each with careful taps. The children gathered around, fascinated. Elena watched, a hand pressed to her mouth. Gregor turned to her, offering a makeshift mallet. "Will you play with me?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. That afternoon the camp changed. From the battered hall music spilled out, not the grand chords of a Steinway, but something wilder, more hopeful. Children pounded rhythms on wood and tin, their laughter rising above the howling wind. Elena sat beside Gregor, coaxing melody from the humble instruments, weaving lessons into the chaos. She sang, her voice trembling at first, then growing strong, filling the air with fragments of Chopin and folk songs from her childhood. The other refugees gathered, drawn by the sound. Some clapped, some stamped their feet, others simply wept, overwhelmed by memories of better times. Even Herr Baumann paused outside the door, his stern face softening for a moment before he turned away, muttering about order but doing nothing to stop them. Gregor watched Elena as she played, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. For the first time in months, she looked truly alive. Afterward, as the last notes faded, the children swarmed around Gregor, begging to play again. Elena laughed, a clear musical sound that sent shivers through him. She turned to him, her smile radiant. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought the music back." He shook his head, humbled. "We all did, together." In the days that followed, the hall became a sanctuary. Word spread through the camp, and soon, even the most withdrawn refugees ventured in, drawn by the promise of music. Gregor became a teacher, showing the children how to tap out rhythms, how to listen for harmony in the clatter. Elena blossomed, her sorrow easing with each lesson, her hope rekindled. They began to write letters to friends beyond the camp, describing their orchestra of scraps. Sometimes Red Cross workers brought spare strings or a battered harmonica, marveling at what the refugees had created. The music echoed beyond the wire fences, a beacon of resilience in a world gone mad. Gregor and Elena grew closer, not with grand declarations but with small everyday gestures. He fixed her shoes when the soles wore thin. She mended his coat with invisible stitches. They shared secrets over mugs of weak coffee, their laughter soft and private. In a place built on loss, they found something precious, the possibility of a future. One evening, as snow drifted down and the children drifted off to sleep, Gregor and Elena lingered by the stove. The firelight danced across their faces. "Vienna seems far away," Gregor murmured, staring into the flames. Elena nodded. "So does Milan, but when we play, I feel them both. I feel home." He reached for her hand, tentative. She laced her fingers with his, steady and sure. "We survived," he said quietly. "We found each other." She smiled, tears glinting in her lashes. "And we made music." Spring crept over the mountains, softening the ground, coaxing green from the earth. Word arrived that the war was turning. Rumors of liberation filtered through the camp, tentative and fragile. Some families left, returning to broken cities. Others waited, uncertain of what lay ahead. Gregor and Elena stayed. Their orchestra of scraps played on, each performance a defiant act of hope. The children grew bolder, inventing their own songs. Adults joined in, their voices blending in rough harmony. The camp, once a place of sorrow, hummed with life. One morning, a Red Cross worker arrived with a surprise. A donated upright piano, battered but whole. The news spread like wildfire. The community hall filled with refugees, their eyes wide with disbelief. Elena approached the piano, her hands trembling. She sat, brushing her fingers over the keys. The first notes rang out, hesitant, then stronger, filling the room with the sound of possibility. Gregor watched her, his heart full. He remembered the broken scraps, the bitter winter, the despair that had nearly consumed them both. None of it had been wasted. Every effort, every failure had led them here. As Elena played, the children clustered around her, singing. The adults joined in, their voices rising. For a moment the war faded, replaced by music and hope. Gregor slipped beside Elena on the bench. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Will you play with me?" she asked, echoing his words from months before. He smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. "Always." Years later, when the war was a memory and the camp had emptied, people would remember the days when music defied hunger and fear. They would remember Gregor and Elena, the engineer and the music teacher, who had built more than a piano. They had built a community, they had built hope. And when Elena played, Gregor would sit beside her, their hands entwined, knowing that even in the darkest times, beauty could be forged from broken things. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What memories or hopes did it bring up for you? If you believe in the power of resilience, of music, and of love that endures even in the hardest times, please give this video a like. And if you want to join us for more unforgettable true stories of hope and humanity, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story, every comment, every connection helps keep the music going. Thank you for listening. And remember, even when the world feels broken, sometimes all it takes is a single note to bring the light back in.